Welcome to Keep It Electric, episode 63. Thrilled to have you along as we dive into another edition of the podcast. Today is Friday, November 15th. We've got quite a bit to unpack as the baseball offseason kicks into high gear. Now, if you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and share Keep It Electric with your fellow sports fans. Your support really does fuel the passion behind the podcast. Now, let's get into it. The offseason is here. We all know what that means. Months of speculation, rumors, and roster gymnastics as teams position themselves for the 2025 season. Now, no major free agents have signed yet, but the hot stove is heating up a little bit. Some clubs are already making some moves, setting the tone for what could be a fascinating winter. So let's start with some quick hits around the league. I can't help but talk about the Angels right now. It's hard not to notice the flurry of activity coming out of Anaheim. So they've made 4 moves already. They acquired Jorge Soler, Kyle Hendricks, Travis Darnold, the catcher, and infielder Sean Kingery. If that feels like a lot, I think that's because it kind of is. And honestly, I think it's kind of to be expected when you have Ron Washington running the team right now. So Ron is a fielding guru, and he's a no-nonsense leader. He's not going to let the Angels sit at the bottom of the AL West for too long. So I'm not ready to say watch out for the Angels, but watch out for the Angels. They're serious about turning things around, and you can bet that they're looking to put pressure on the rest of the AL West next season. Speaking of the AL West teams, the Astros also added former Mariner Taylor Tremayne. Tremayne, he has undeniable pop. His contact struggles have always been a concern. Add to the fact that he's hitting in a lefty unfriendly Minute Maid Park for half the year. It's kind of a puzzling fit, but credit to him for finding a spot on a competitive roster. Back to the Pacific Northwest, it's quiet for now. That's not really a surprise. Early off seasons often see teams waiting to see where the biggest names, i.e. Juan Soto, will land before they make their moves. Soto reportedly had a solid meeting in Boston. Who cares? Toronto's rumored pursuit of Pete Alonso, that could shake things up. So if the Jays do land Alonso and shift Vladdy to third, that lineup could be pretty scary. One rumor making waves is the Mariners' reported interest in Gleyber Torres for second base. Now, I think this is just a rumor, and I do have some strong feelings about this. Frankly, I don't see the appeal. Torres is coming off of a down year offensively, which is particularly concerning considering he was batting in a loaded Yankees lineup. He had names like Soto, Judge, Chisholm Jr., Stanton, and Austin Wells all batting around him. His production was underwhelming at best. And then another red flag is his defense. His defense is trash. Torres has posted negative defensive wins above replacement in all but 2 seasons in his career. He committed 18 errors last year. Simply put, he's a liability in the field. For a Mariners team that values defense and efficiency, adding Torres feels like a step backward. So personally, I'm out. I'm out on Torres. Hard pass. Moving on here to Trey's grades. Today's focus, the Mariners outfield. So should the team stick with what they have, or are changes in order? Let's go ahead and take a look and break that down. The Mariners outfield as it stands, we're looking at, on the current roster, the active roster here, Randy Arozarena, Dom Canzone, Mitch Haniger, Luke Raley, Victor Robles, Julio Rodriguez, Cade Marlowe, and Sam Haggerty. So at first glance, this group has a mix of talent, promise, and even more questions. So let's tackle the elephant in the room. The first things first is Mitch Haniger. There's a Mitch Haniger dilemma. Mitch Haniger is a Mariners fan favorite. It's not hard to see why. Over the years, he's delivered clutch hits. He's been a steady veteran. He's got a good presence in the clubhouse. But when you look at his 2024 performance, it's clear that the present doesn't really align with the past. So last season, Haniger had a batting average of 208, 12 home runs, 44 ribbies, and appeared in 121 games. His offensive wins above replacement was negative. His defensive metrics were even worse. So for a player whose bat isn't delivering, it's critical to add value with the glove. And unfortunately, Mitch fell short on both of those fronts. It gets even more complicated with him because he decided to opt in and exercise his $17.5 million player option. So he locked in his payday, his payday, like, it exceeds the current market value for him. 33 years old, he's on the back nine of his career. That was a really smart move for Mitch Haniger. I'm not hating him for that. You can't fault him for securing his bag. From the Mariners' perspective, this presents a significant challenge. Like 17.5 mil now off the table for roster improvements. It's a tough blow for a team who's already working with quote unquote budgetary constraints. So while fans and the front office like hoped that he would opt out and test free agency, it was always going to be unlikely. Why in the world would he walk away from a guaranteed payday when the open market wouldn't even match that? It wouldn't come close. So what can the Mariners do about that? Trading Haniger feels like the most logical option, but that is easier said than done. His combination of age, declining production, and his high salary makes him a tough sell. So if the Mariners want to move him, they would likely need to package him with a promising prospect to entice another team to take on that contract. Now, if a trade doesn't materialize, which I would be very surprised if one does, Haniger is probably going to be around for the start of the 2025 season. The Mariners will need to hope for him to start off hot. Not only would that actually help the team get some wins, but it would also rebuild his trade value. So a productive first half could turn him into a viable midseason trade chip and allow the Mariners to pivot and open up some payroll space. But I would consider Mitch Haniger a lock on the Mariners roster for the 2025 season. Now let's take a closer look at Dom Canzone. Dom Canzone, he's a player whose future with the Mariners feels a bit up in the air. I am a fan of Canzone. One thing to note about him is he's not arbitration eligible until 2027. So free agency is a long way away. I think we're looking at 2030. So for a team like Seattle with they're pretty mindful of their payroll flexibility, this is a good thing. So he's not taking up a lot of space financially, and there's no immediate pressure to make a decision on him. Now, Canzone comes with a unique set of tools to the table. He brings a unique set of tools. For one, his power is undeniable, especially considering his relatively modest frame, to say the least. He's not a physically imposing player, but he has a swing that generates really good pop, and it doesn't take a lot of effort for that. He just kind of barrels them up. So when he connects, the ball jumps off his bat. That's a really exciting trait for him. However, he's got a really high strikeout rate, which that was a glaring issue last year. His strikeout rate went up, I believe, 11%. So he ended the year batting 196, 8 home runs and 17 ribbies. Those numbers don't really scream reliability, to say the least. So he's definitely trying to solidify a spot in the big leagues. He's definitely a fringe Major League Baseball player right now. Defensively, Canzone, he had some standout moments last year. He had that jaw-dropping catch where he ran into the wall. He collided into the outfield wall. Unfortunately, that same play sidelined him for a stretch due to injury. He had another diving catch, I believe that was Sunday Night Baseball. So the glimpses of defensive potential are promising, but they don't really offset his inconsistencies at the plate. What stood out the most about Canzone's 2024 season was his constant tinkering with his batting stance. I don't know if anyone noticed that, but if you watch closely, it seemed like every time he came back from Tacoma and got another shot in the lineup, he had a slightly different stance at the plate. He experimented a lot, and I think that experimentation likely contributed to his struggles with consistency for contact. So, he's still a young player. He's especially trying to break into a crowded outfield picture, to say the least. So, stability in his approach at the plate is key for him. So looking ahead at Canzone's future with the Mariners, it might depend on how he performs this offseason and in spring training. If everyone in the outfield is healthy, it's hard to see him making the opening day roster. He still has a lot of potential, and I'm still a big fan, but right now, he just feels like a fringe major leaguer, someone who is yet to establish his place. That said, I wouldn't write him off completely. The power he brings is valuable, and with more time to refine his game, Canzone could still be a reliable contributor to this franchise. So it'll be interesting to see how the Mariners handle him, especially with the team likely looking to make some offseason upgrades. He could be in some kind of package deal. For now, he's kind of a wild card player. He's got really intriguing upside, but a lot of work to do before he becomes a real piece to the puzzle here. Let's dive into two players who can kind of spark a debate amongst maybe deep Mariners fans. Those two players are Sam Haggerty and Cade Marlowe. Both those names kind of jumped off the page a little bit when I was looking over the active roster. Let's start with Haggerty. Haggerty is the kind of player Mariners fans tend to have a love-hate relationship with. Personally, I like the guy a lot. I'm rooting for the guy. I think everyone is. He just can be a little bit of a frustrating player. His game is built around hustle, speed. He's kind of pesky. He's a thorn in the side of pitchers, especially on the base paths. His approach kind of reminds me a little bit of Jose Caballero, just scrappy, pesky base runner who knows how to manufacture pressure on the base paths. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see much of Haggerty in 2024. He played just 8 games at the major league level before being sent down to Tacoma, where he then immediately suffered an injury that kept him out for the rest of the season. So, tough blow for him. We've always kind of relied on Sam Haggerty to seize the opportunities that are given to him to stay relevant on the roster, and he didn't have the opportunity to do that last year. Haggerty's role with the Mariners has always been pretty clear. He's a versatile utility player who can fill in as needed, much like Dylan Moore. And for what he's been, he's kind of exceeded the expectations since we claimed him off waivers in 2020 from the Mets. So who would have guessed back then that Haggerty would have such an impact at this point? When you look at 2022, his wins above replacement was through the roof for a player who didn't even have an everyday role. So he's not a power hitter, but he's a smart, disruptive player, and he can really grind it out. He can grind it on the base paths and in the batter's box. So Haggerty is turning 30. He's going on 31. So at this point, he knows who he is, and so does the organization. He's a solid contributor. He's likely viewed as expendable. So especially if the Mariners can package him in a trade this offseason to address other needs, depending on how the offseason shakes out, Haggerty might make the opening day roster, but that's likely contingent on whether the Mariners upgrade their outfield or utility depth. So he's a great guy to have around, but the team won't hesitate to move on if it means improvements elsewhere. That turns us to Cade Marlowe, another player whose name can probably be brought up in trade speculation. Marlowe had a breakout season in 2022. He absolutely crushed it in Double-A Arkansas. That put him firmly on the Mariners' radar as a potential future piece. But since reaching AAA, his production has dipped. There was a moment when it seemed like Marlowe might get a serious look at the major league level, but when those opportunities came, he didn't really seize them. His performance at the plate hadn't really been consistent enough to warrant a long-term spot. And with players like Dom Canzone ahead of him in the pecking order, it's hard to see exactly where Marlowe fits right now. I think he's on the active roster to keep him from really being like a part of the Rule 5 draft. The Mariners kind of want to see what they have with him. At this stage, Marlowe feels more like a potential trade chip as well than a key part of the Mariners' future. If the team is looking to make moves to bolster the roster, Marlowe as well could be easily included in a deal, in my opinion. So both of them are fringe roster players for different reasons. Haggerty's carved out a niche to be a scrappy utility player, but his ceiling is well defined. Marlowe's ceiling, I don't think it's as defined just yet. Now, that brings us to the main four in the core of the outfield next year. That's Arozarena, Raley, Robles, and Julio. I'm going to start with Luke Raley. Luke Raley, I believe, will most likely be part of a platoon with Victor Robles in right field next season. It's a pairing I'm actually genuinely excited about. Both players bring solid tools to the outfield. Both have strong arms. Both have above average speed. On top of that, I feel like this is a really good complement. They complement each other really well offensively. Robles hits lefties effectively as a right-hand batter. Raley hits righties effectively as a left-handed batter. So this combination gives the Mariners a flexible and productive setup in right field, which is something every team probably values. Now, we might also see Luke Raley getting some time at first base occasionally. That adds another layer to his versatility. But right now, I just kind of want to focus on his outfield role and reflect on what he accomplished last year. In his first full season with the Mariners, Raley hit 243, 22 home runs, 58 ribbies. So really decent production. Not a small feat, especially with where he's hitting and how that offense was last year. He showcased his ability to go deep with some monster home runs. And for me, that power potential was evident before he even joined the Mariners. I'll never forget the towering shot he hit off of George Kirby before he was traded here. So that was one of the moments to me that like made me think when we acquired him that he was going to love hitting in T-Mobile Park. Speaking of which, he really didn't disappoint. So, of those 22 home runs he hit last year, 15 of them came in T-Mobile. So to me, that's just further proof that he is a good fit for the roster and a good fit to hit in our home ballpark. His ability to hit for power in Seattle's ballpark is probably maybe the best part of his skill set right now. So, um, another big factor to consider with Rayleigh is his contract. We've had him on a very friendly deal as well. So his earliest arbitration year is not coming until 2026. So we have a couple more years of Rayleigh's production at a bargain price unless a truly game-changing trade opportunity comes along. Keep in mind that last year was also Rayleigh's first full season in the majors, so there's plenty of room for growth along with him too. I don't think he's actually touched his ceiling. So overall, Luke Rayleigh shaping up to be an important piece of the Mariners team. I think the Mariners front office is high on him. He's one of those guys. Now, looking at Victor Robles, I believe he'll be splitting time in right field with Luke Rayleigh. We'll probably see him spelling Julio in center field as well. And if you've been following along, you know I've touched on Robles a few times before, but I want to approach this because I'm going to touch on him again here. I want to approach it a little differently today because Victor Robles is a pretty big story for the Mariners, all things considering. So, for lack of better phrase, one man's trash is another man's treasure. It fully applies here when it comes to Victor Robles. But let's be clear, Robles was never trashed. I mean, he was a little trash. He probably said that he was trash at the beginning of 2024 when he was in Washington. But at the end of the day, Robles was a highly touted prospect. He's a key part of the Washington Nationals World Series run a few years ago. The problem was that he never quite lived up to like the expectations that they had for him as a Nationals baseball player. Injuries also played a big role, and again, at the beginning of 2024, his performance at the plate was really, really rough. So when it comes down to Robles, to me, it came down to like a bad fit in the clubhouse at that point, and a bad fit there can make things worse. I think that's exactly what happened to Robles when he's playing for the Nationals. And then the Mariners took a chance on him, and everything changed at that point. He's been reinvigorated. He brings a fresh energy to the team, the clubhouse, and even in the ballpark, you could feel it. Yeah, Victor Robles is just infectious. So one of the things I really liked about Robles and his addition was honestly how he was embraced by the Mariners fan base. Seattle fans, I tell you what, moving here, it's been great to see how incredibly supportive Seattle fans are. They find positives in the players, even when things aren't going well. You could argue it could be because it's been tough season after tough season when it comes to Seattle baseball. But I'd be remiss to say we have to acknowledge that Seattle is like a pretty good baseball city. So the way Robles was welcomed with open arms, he was rewarded by support from the fan base. And I feel like that kind of assisted in transforming his game. And I believe he's one of the guys I think he even said it himself, the fan base really does feel him. So in some ways, Victor Robles' story, even though we acquired him through waivers, it reminds me a lot of JP Crawford's journey here to Seattle. JP was another guy with massive expectations. He was playing for an East Coast baseball team. He was playing in Philly, and he was just really getting a lot of heat. When the Mariners traded for him, I was actually stoked. I've always been a big fan of JP. I was following JP when he was in the minor leagues. And me being from the East Coast, like that was a name that I heard a lot. Yes, I was an East Coast. I lived on the East Coast and have been a Mariners fan my entire life. I believe I said that in episode 1. So JP Crawford was on my radar when I was living on the East Coast. JP, he hasn't really become, top 5. He's not top 5 elite shortstops, but he was an incredible addition and an incredible asset for Seattle. And I feel like Victor Robles is walking similarly in his shoes right now with his addition to Seattle. He's consistent, he's been dependable, and he could potentially be a cornerstone of the roster. That's the path that I feel like Robles is on right now, which is similar to the comparisons I have for him and JP. Now, I really also like Robles' 2-year extension. I think it's smart for both sides. He hasn't shown enough consistency to warrant a long-term deal, but it gives him a chance to prove himself while keeping the Mariners in control of his contract. They also have a club option for 2027, so there's flexibility there. And if he continues to perform, he could stick around long term. If not, we'll likely see some changes in the outfield in a few years, which actually fall right in line with Raley and Rosarina. So for now, Robles is trending towards being one of those set it and forget it players. He's not there yet, but he is trending towards a guy that you can count on every day. And his impact on the team and on the roster right now has been completely undeniable. I'm excited to see what he does when it comes into what he does in the upcoming season. All right, I'm pretty sure you guys have kind of figured out the trajectory of where we're going here in this podcast. We're going to move on to Randy Rosarina. Randy Rosarina, when the Mariners acquired him, I was excited, but I wasn't excited in the way you'd get excited about a blockbuster deal or game-changing move. I was excited because Randy is a really solid player. He's also the kind of guy who can take you on an emotional roller coaster, and we kind of got a glimpse of that at the end of last season. Um, he's got good pop in his bat. He's got great speed. He's a classic 2020 player. That's a lot to love. There's so much to love about that. Last year wasn't his best year. I think anyone would probably call that a down year for him. I think a lot of that was mental. He loved playing in Tampa Bay. He probably saw the trade coming. He didn't want to leave the Rays. He made that very known. So adjusting to a new team midseason can be tough, especially when you didn't want to leave the original team in the first place. Once he got to Seattle and started building relationships with guys like Julio and Victor, you could see the shift. So his performance started to turn around, and by the end of the season, he was showing us what he's capable of. So let's look at the difference here. Before he was traded to Seattle, he was hitting .211 in Tampa Bay, 15 home runs, 37 ribbies. After the move was made, he hit .235, 5 home runs, 23 ribbies in a very limited time as a Mariner. It wasn't earth-shattering, but it was progress, to say the least. To me, it showed enough potential to warrant being the starter in left field for the 2025 season. So I'm curious to see what he does over a full season in Seattle. He's also under contract with arbitration until 2026. So that gives us 2 full years with Rosarina, Robles, Julio, and Raley together as the core of this outfield. And, I get it. Like, everybody wants a big move like Juan Soto. Trust me, I would love Soto on this team as much as the next person. He is a game changer, no question about it. If you add Juan Soto to this roster, the Mariners are a playoff team. That is no doubt. But I think there's something special brewing with this group without an addition like Juan Soto. These 4 guys haven't hit their full potential at all in a Mariners uniform, and I think that's something to be excited about. Now, if these 4 can stay healthy, refine their approach at the plate, hopefully with a little help from Edgar Martinez, if he stays, work on their game in this offseason, I think we're looking at an outfield with an extremely high ceiling. So, sure, if they flop next season, we have a reason to worry. On paper, the group has the tools to be a huge asset for the Mariners. We got a glimpse of that towards the end of the season, but unfortunately, at that point, it was a little too late. Too many teams got hot at the same time. And honestly, the Detroit Tigers, I blame them for the Mariners missing the playoffs all the way around. It's all the Tigers' fault. Just blame them. In any case, Randy Rosarina is someone to keep an eye on. His combination of power, speed, and experience can make a big impact for the Mariners going to Seattle for a full season next year. Now, it's time to talk about Julio Rodriguez, and of course, why wouldn't we end with Julio Rodriguez? He played 143 games last season, finished with a .273 batting average, just a couple points lower than the year before. Still very much in line batting average-wise with what we've seen from him in his first 3 years as the Mariners center fielder. Now, he finished last year with 20 home runs, 68 ribbies, and 24 stolen bases. The power wasn't there. The contact wasn't there for a large part of last year. All things considered, it was a down year for Julio. He had some struggles at the plate, but honestly, yeah, he had an issue with tweaking his swing. He lost a lot of rhythm, but on the plus side, as soon as Edgar Martinez joined the coaching staff, we saw Julio's swing come back. His confidence returned, and there is a lot to be optimistic about when it comes to Julio Rodriguez heading into next year. So there's another thing I need to say, and I need to be clear when I say this. Julio is getting a lot of heat, and I get it in some ways. People expect him to be a superstar, but I think the reality is we have to accept that not everyone is Bobby Witt Jr. Not everyone is Juan Soto. Julio's still growing. He's 23 years old. I think part of the issue is that he feels like he had, at least for the first couple years, and even I think for a large part of last year, he's felt like he's had to carry the team. He plays hero baseball, and hero baseball really isn't going to work, and we really shouldn't command that out of him either. So, you know, I think the other thing to call out is he hasn't exactly had the best supporting cast around him. So, that being said, I think just a couple of key upgrades this offseason, keeping the outfield intact, focusing on the infield, I think we'll see Julio take the next step. I'm fully expecting a bounce back year for Julio. I think he can. Okay, that's not true. Do I think he can replicate his 2023 numbers? I'm not sure if he can replicate 32 home runs and 103 ribbies. I don't know. I just don't know if he can. But what I do believe is if other bats step up in the order, he can definitely produce over 103 ribbies. I think he can do that. With the way Julio and Kyle Riley are capable of hitting, like we've seen it, all the Mariners need is for the rest of the lineup to kind of bounce back a little bit, and we'll see it. So, and the main reason why I don't, just to be clear, the main reason why I'm not sure if he can replicate his 2023 numbers is he's not trying to hit the ball out of the park as often. Now, 32 home runs, like, sure, there's a guys with a lot of power who can hit 32 home runs. I'm just saying Julio doesn't need to hit 32 home runs for it to be called a successful year for him. So, um, now there's also some big names in the free agent market, but honestly, like the Mariners outfield isn't the problem. I don't really see us making a really big move or really key addition in the outfield. And really, like, yeah, if it's not for Juan Soto, then I don't care. Um, and when it comes to Juan Soto, they're not going to compete with teams like Boston, LA, the Yankees, Mets, or even the Blue Jays. They're all rumored to be in the mix for Soto. Seattle isn't going to outbid those teams. The Mariners are, they have too much invested in their core players already. So going after Soto would leave them in a tough spot financially, especially with all the arms they're going to need to pay in the coming years if they don't trade them off. So adding Soto to the mix really would jeopardize the long-term flexibility that the Mariners have right now. So I kind of went off I kind of went off at a tangent, but I also had I'm going to go a little bit longer here. I have to mention another thing, and that's Cal Riley. He continues to impress. I know I gave him his flowers last week, but every time I mention his name, it's like the following week since the previous podcast where I mentioned him, like he gets another award. So he got the Gold Glove, and I talked about that last week. And then between last week and today, he got the Platinum Glove. I thought for sure that he was going to get the Silver Slugger, but he did not get that. That kind of sucks. That ended up going to Salvador Perez. So I believe he finished runner up to Salvador Perez. And, Salvador Perez, he earned it. Like, I think Riley, he hit more home runs than Perez, but he did not hit as many ribbies. He did not have, he was behind him when it comes down to batting average and other statistical categories. So it makes sense that Perez won, but it would have been really cool to watch Kyle Riley walk away with the Silver Slugger, Gold Glove, and Platinum Glove as well. So in closing, like, if I had to grade the Mariners outfield last year, I would honestly give it a solid B minus. It's not a perfect grade. It's not a bad grade either. It's a good grade. And considering all the changes we saw in the outfield last year between injuries, platoons, and streaks of hot and cold play, I'm confident that we haven't really seen this outfield reach its full potential yet. And that's what I'm going to be looking for in 2025 to see how this outfield grows from this previous season. Looking at the outfield opening day, I'm sure we're going to see Julio in center, Rosarina in left, and Robles in right, or Raley in right, depending on who's on the mound on opening day. That's all for today's episode of Keep It Electric. This is episode 63. Next week, we'll dive into the pitching staff. I think we probably all have a solid idea of what grade that they'll get. We'll also talk about any necessary upgrades or moves the Mariners need to make. And again, like while I didn't touch on the outfield free agent market, I don't think we really needed to, given the state of the outfield right now. So I hope everyone has a great weekend. As always, go Mariners.